welcome to another dark chapter here at Graveyard Dance. Today's story is a dark one. I have to warn you of that in advance. I also couldn't find as many photos as I'd usually like, but we do have one of the evil queen wannabe Teresa Knorr herself. We hope you enjoy the story, but more so, we hope you'll help our channel grow by giving our video a like, subscribe and share it with your friends. If you're easily offended by dark and evil content, you may want to sit this one out. If you're still here, kick back, grab a snack and a beverage of choice, and now without further hesitation, on with the show.
We've covered some really bad parents over the last year here on GraveyardDance.com, including these two unfit folks by the names of James Craig Kaler and Diane Downs. Both, when you go to our website and click videos and scroll back and click on their stories, will absolutely sicken you to your very core and make you thank God for your own parents, no matter what their faults are. The she-beast we are about to write about today is just one more example of people who should never attempt parenting. Teresa Knorr, unfortunately, was born on March 14, 1946 to parents James, or Jim as he preferred to be called, Cross, and mother Swanee Gay in Sacramento, California. She was the youngest of two daughters in that family, but had an older brother and older sister from her mother's previous marriage. Teresa's dad worked as an assistant cheesemaker at a local dairy, but soon came down with Parkinson's disease and was forced to retire while her mother went to work and took various jobs to support the family. Before he retired, though, the family bought a small, modest home in Rio Linda, California. According to her, her dad was very abusive towards his family, both mentally and physically, to not only his wife, but his daughters as well. She absolutely loved and adored her mother, but tried to stay out of her father's way. Teresa was devastated when her mother died of congestive heart failure in 1961. Her father sold the family home not long after burying his wife, which left Teresa in need of a place to stay. Lucky for her, but unlucky for the poor sap she met, she found a man to take her in and marry her when she was just 16. Teresa and her new man, Clifford Clyde Sanders, tied the knot on September 29th of 1962. He had no idea of knowing what kind of crazy he had just signed up for. Before long, their first child came along, a baby boy they named Howard Sanders. To say the marriage was a rocky one would be the understatement of the century. Teresa was batshit crazy and constantly accused Clyde of cheating. During an argument one day, she hit herself in the face to cause some reddening and called the police to claim he hit her. She calmed down though and refused to press charges. He should have left then and gotten away from this tune, but he stayed for the sake of his son and upcoming daughter. Unfortunately, he would never live to see her. During an argument in 1964, Sheila took out his rifle and shot him in the back as he was leaving the house to get away from her. Incredibly, she somehow was found not guilty of murder. That just shows you how good of a liar she was. It wouldn't be long until she met husband number 2, but not before giving birth to her second child, a beautiful daughter named Sheila. After the birth of their daughter Sheila, Teresa started hanging around the American Legion, where she met a retired army man named Estelle Thornsberry. He soon allowed her and her kids to move in, but that didn't last long either. Before long, she was staying out all night, drinking and cheating, and Estelle wasn't about to sit home and babysit her kids while she tried to play him. When she cheated on him with one of his good friends, he did what anyone else would do and put her out on the curb where she belonged. That's when she met the man who would carry the name of all her future children. A man who was a United States Marine private named Robert Knorr. They got married on July 9th of 1966. Before long, they welcomed their next child, Suzanne Marlene Knorr. By now, her kids consisted of Howard Sanders, who was born on July 16th of 1963, Sheila Gay Sanders, who was born March 16th of 1965, and now Suzanne Marlene Knorr on September 27th of 1966. She would go on to have 3 more children. William Knorr was born September 15th of 1967, Robert Wallace Knorr Jr. on December 31st of 1968, and finally, Teresa Mary Knorr on August 5th, 1970, who went by the name Terry. These poor kids would go on to live one of the most hellish lives anyone could ever imagine. Just like with all the others, she drank constantly and always accused him of cheating. Whether he was or not is questionable, but after a couple years of non-stop fighting and arguing, Robert filed for a divorce in December of 1970, and it was finalized sometime in 71. Robert would try to see his children, but Teresa, being the hag she was, would never allow him to do so. She'd go on to marry twice more. The ink was barely dry on her divorce papers from Robert before she met and married Ronald Pulliam, who was a railroad worker. Soon, she was up to her old tricks again. She was running around to bars and staying out all night, expecting her new husband to stay home and watch all her kids. He divorced her in 1972 because he became convinced that she was cheating. You think? Her next and final marriage was to Chet Harris, who was a newspaper editor. They married in August of '76, and Chet actually liked spending time with her kids. Her oldest daughter in particular became very fond of Chet, which drove Teresa insane. After all her years of drinking and partying, that along with age started making her lose her looks. Her daughters were young, 2 of them being teenagers. She became very jealous of them and started to berate them and beat them every chance she got. She was extremely cruel to all her kids, but her 2 oldest daughters really took the brunt of all the abuse. She soon started accusing Chet of teaching Suzanne witchcraft and cheating. Sound familiar? She also claimed she had found out that Chet liked taking consensual nude photos of other women, but whether or not that was true is unknown. What was known though was that they got divorced in 1977. Teresa had never been a good mother by any stretch of the imagination, but by her 4th divorce, she started to increasingly become unhinged and treat the kids worse and worse as time went on. By her final divorce, she was completely one vicious and cruel person who should have had her kids taken away. By now, she was not only verbally abusive, mentally abusive, but now she was physically abusing them as well. On any given day, she would cuss them out and tell them how they were never wanted, or what kind of problems they were, or how they were to blame for all her life's issues. No kid deserves that, but it went so much worse. She would beat them with straps, put cigarettes out on their arms or legs, slap, punch, kick and stomp them, and even throw knives at them. I can't even wrap my head around it. How could anyone do such sickening things to their own children? Sometimes she would force feed them until they vomited, and other times she would make them go hungry for days at a time. As the girls got older and their looks blossomed and her own looks faded, she even began to make the boys attack and beat their own sisters. One day, after a particularly bad beating, her 2nd oldest daughter Suzanne ran away, but was picked up by police and was placed in a psychiatric ward before being taken home. She tried to tell them how bad the abuse was, but no one believed her. When they took her home, Teresa was livid. She put on a pair of leather gloves and began punching and beating the poor girl, who was just barely a teenager. She removed her from school so that no one would know what was happening to her. Beaten and bloodied, Suzanne spent the next 2 years of her life handcuffed to the kitchen table. She'd be starved, and water withheld from her, and wasn't even allowed to go to the bathroom. If it wasn't for her sisters sneaking in food or water, she would have starved to death or died of dehydration. 2 years into this insane punishment, she uncuffed her from the kitchen table while she put on her gloves to beat her. This crazy lunatic woman gave a gun to the youngest daughter and told her to hold her sister there at gunpoint. She was just a little kid, scared to death, and probably never meant to shoot her sister, but the gun went off and a bullet lodged in Suzanne's back. She was carried to the bathtub and just left there to die. Somehow, she lived, even despite the bullet being lodged in her back. She begged her mother to allow her to leave and said she'd never come back if she was allowed to go. Teresa pondered the idea and said yes, as long as she was allowed to remove the bullet from her back. She didn't want any proof coming back on her of the abuse she had suffered in case her daughter decided to go to the police. So, her and her son Robert laid her down on the floor and tried to cut the bullet out. No pain medication, nothing for sanitation. You can guess what happened. The poor child died of infection and sepsis. Instead of maybe realizing that something may be wrong with her or turning herself in, nope, not Teresa. She loaded up her daughter in a box along with her things, and they took her out and dumped her on the side of the road. She doused her daughter in gasoline and set her on fire, But there was one problem. When they found the body and did the autopsy, it was determined that Suzanne was not dead at the time she was set on fire. Can you even believe this woman? Just when you think this story couldn't possibly get any worse or more vile. Guess what? It does. Now that Suzanne was gone, Teresa started to take out the brunt of her anger and hatred on her oldest daughter, Sheila. The part we're about to discuss is almost too unreal to even tell. How anyone's mind could become this messed up, I have no idea or clue. Again, she started to beat and cuss Sheila now more than the other kids, but none of them got away without physical or emotional scars, but Sheila became enemy number one on her mother's list. She not only beat her, but even forced her own child into prostitution. Can you even believe that? After forcing her young daughter to do all of these things with these paying dirtbags, she had the audacity of claiming that Sheila had brought in an STD and given it to her via the toilet seat. If Teresa had actually had an STD, I doubt very seriously she needed a toilet seat's help getting it, but anywho. This was enough to unleash her rage once again, and she beat little Sheila nearly to death and locked her in a closet where she would refuse to let her out. She couldn't eat, drink, and was even forced to defecate in the closet where she was held. Within a few days, she stopped knocking and begging to be let out. Teresa Nora had just murdered another child. Sheila was left in the closet so long that her body began to leak fluids into the carpet and smell so bad that Teresa was afraid that the neighbors would find out what happened. All her kids had been taken out of school and none were allowed to go past the 8th grade. They were never even allowed outside, so no one could have known what was going on in their home, but Teresa had her boys burn the house down so none of the evidence in the closet could ever be found and so that the neighbors wouldn't notice the smell. They set the fire and took off, but didn't light it well enough. The fire didn't even reach the closet, and soon the police did find it and started looking for the family now who was long gone. Sheila, just like her sister, ended up in a box on the side of a road, but she wasn't burned. She, like her sister Suzanne, was listed as a Jane Doe. Police soon tracked her down and arrested her. This allowed 3 of her children to escape. Howard and William took off together, and her youngest daughter Terry took Sheila's ID to pass as an adult and fled as well to try to escape her mother. Teresa was soon let out on bail, and she took off on the run with her son Robert to Las Vegas, but that didn't last too long either. Just like his mother, he had a penchant for violence, and he shot a bartender and got 16 years in prison as a result. The years of abuse and seeing 2 of her sisters murdered took its toll on Terry Knorr. As soon as she was safely away from her mother, she sought help by calling the police and tried reporting everything that had happened. They didn't believe her. Her story was so incredulous, they didn't think there was any way it could possibly be true. So she decided to seek therapy, where she tried telling her therapist what happened. They didn't believe her story either. One night she was watching a TV show called America's Most Wanted and decided to try one more time to get justice for her sisters. She called the hotline and told her story. This time, someone listened to her. They put her in touch with detectives in Placer County, California, where the bodies were found in 1984 and 85. As soon as they knew she was telling the truth, they arrested 2 of her brothers. First was William, and then Robert, who was already serving time for the armed robbery and murder of the bartender. Teresa had moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, where she was working as the caretaker of an 86-year-old woman. Can you imagine finding out that someone like her was your elderly parents' caretaker? She was taken into custody and arrested on November 15th of 93. She was charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, as well as other charges including torture. She was dead set on denying everything until she found out that her son Robert had made a bargain for reduced charges so he could get out sooner if he testified against her. To spare herself the death penalty, she agreed to admit to what she had done. On October 17th of 95, Teresa Knorr was sent to prison to serve 2 consecutive life sentences. The children, who were all now adults, could now do their best to start the healing process. Teresa is sentenced at the California Institute for Women in Chino, California. She's come up for parole once and denied, and comes up again next year. Let's hope she's kept under lock and key until her final breath is taken. William was sentenced to probation in order to take therapy. Robert received 3 years for his part, which was to be served with his 16 years he previously got. Terry Knorr, the one to turn in her mother for her grisly crimes, married twice and eventually moved to Sandy, Utah with her husband and worked at a grocery store. She moved there to get far away from her mother, but had no idea that her mother was living so close to her. The stress and struggles of life was too much for her. She unfortunately passed away at 41 years old in 2011. If you liked today's story, please by all means help us out by becoming a subscriber. Just hit that subscribe button and like our videos. It'll tell them that you like our type of content and help our channel grow. We appreciate each and every one of you very much. We also have links to all our social medias and merchandise shop in the description box you can check out to show your support. If you have a story you'd like to hear about, comment down below in the comments section. We love hearing everything you have to say. Till next time, thanks for watching.